A river that holds the center of a continent is being invaded. Not rerouted, not polluted. Invaded by the ocean itself, from the bottom up. As of this year, the Mississippi River, the artery of America, is losing a fight it was never meant to have. Its freshwater flow has become so weak that a silent, invisible wedge of saltwater from the Gulf of Mexico is pushing its way inland, upstream, against the current. The numbers are precise. A flow rate of 300,000 cubic feet per second is the bare minimum required to hold the Gulf at bay. In recent months, that flow has fallen to nearly half, just 150,000 cubic feet per second. This is the part that is not in the headlines. We think of a river as a one-way force. This is a story about a river flowing in two directions at once. I'm curious what you think is the real cause of this. Let me know in the comments. Hundreds of miles north, the riverbed sits exposed. Barges carrying the nation's harvest are running aground in mud that was just 2 years ago deep channel. A lot of people who see these events unfold on the news watch one video and then the algorithm moves on. But the story doesn't. These deep dives take hundreds of hours to research and produce. And over half our viewers aren't subscribed. If you believe this kind of independent journalism is important, please take a moment to subscribe. It is the only way these stories get told. Let's begin. To understand the crisis, you have to understand the river's strange geometry. For its final 256 miles from the heart of Louisiana to the Gulf, the Mississippi River's channel is actually below sea level. It's an upside-down river, a trench carved into the continent's edge, protected only by the sheer force of freshwater pushing down from 31 states. When that force weakens, the physics become simple and terrifying. Salt water, which is 2.5% denser than fresh water, doesn't mix. It slides underneath, an unseen tsunami moving in reverse, hugging the river bottom. On October 20th, 2022, the gauge at Memphis, Tennessee, hit a near-record low of negative 10.8. 1 feet, this does not mean the river was empty. It means the water level had fallen more than 10 feet below the zero line, a reference point set for safe navigation. For the river economy, a negative number is a catastrophe. It means the 45-foot deep channel the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers works to maintain is no longer 45 feet deep. It means the steel hulls of barges are scraping bottom. It means the spine of American commerce is paralyzed. Then something changed. The problem was no longer just about depth, it was about chemistry. The saltwater wedge, which had been a theoretical threat for decades, became an active invasion. It began advancing up that sub-sea level channel at a rate of miles per day. Its target, the municipal water intakes for the coastal communities of Louisiana. First in line was Plaquemines Parish, a community of 23,000 people at the river's end. Their drinking water, their irrigation for crops, the water for their homes and hospitals, all of it was about to be contaminated by the ocean. In September of 2022, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, New Orleans District, scrambled, led by their commander at the time, Colonel Cullen A. Jones. They initiated an emergency plan that sounded like something from a science fiction film. They would build a mountain on the bottom of the Mississippi River. At River Mile 64, near Bellechasse, Louisiana, dredges began pulling tons of sediment from the river bottom and piling it up, creating a massive underwater barrier called a sill. The goal was not to stop the salt water, but to force it upward, to trip it up into the faster-flowing freshwater at the surface, where it could be diluted and pushed back out to the Gulf. It was a desperate, colossal feat of engineering against an invisible enemy. But here is the detail that tells the real story. The 2022 drought was not an isolated event. It was a preview. The summer of 2023 was hotter and drier. The lack of rainfall across the entire Mississippi basin, from the plains of Iowa to the forests of Minnesota, meant the river was again starving for water. By June of 2023, the levels were dropping again. The saltwater wedge, which had been repelled, reformed. It started moving north again, this time faster. On September 18th, 2023, Louisiana's governor at the time, John Bell Edwards, declared a state of emergency. New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell did the same for her city. The sill built in 2022 was not enough. It had been overtopped. The Corps had to go back and build another, even taller one. This is the part the national news does not capture. The fight on the lower Mississippi is a symptom of a much larger disease spreading across the continent. The barges now stuck in the mud near Memphis and St. Louis are the lifeblood of the American heartland. The Mississippi River system transports approximately 500 million tons of goods annually. Think about that number. That includes 60% of all U.S. grain exports. It's 78% of the world's export feed grains and soybeans. Mike Steenhoek, the executive director of the Soy Transportation Coalition, has said it plainly. This is not just a Louisiana problem. This affects the entire agricultural economy of the United States. A farmer in Iowa who loads his soybeans onto a barge expects it to reach the Gulf and be loaded onto a ship bound for Asia or Europe. But when the river is at negative 10 feet, the draft restrictions begin. A barge that normally carries cargo loaded to a depth of 12 feet might be forced to load only to 9 feet, or even 6 feet. That means less cargo per trip, higher costs, and critical delays. For a global food market already on edge, these delays ripple outwards, manifesting as higher prices on grocery shelves thousands of miles away. The economic domino effect touches at least 12 states directly, from the head of navigation in Minneapolis-St. Paul, Minnesota, down through Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri, all the way to the Gulf. If you know anyone whose livelihood depends on farming or logistics in one of these states, you may want to share this story with them. It is their story too. As the river shrinks, it gives up its dead. In October of 2022, while engineers battled the saltwater intrusion hundreds of miles south, something else was happening near Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The receding water exposed the skeletal remains of ships. Not just old boats, but 19th century vessels, including a ferry known as the Brookhill that was scuttled during the Civil War. Dr. Chip McGimsey, Louisiana's state archaeologist, has been surveying these ghost ships as they emerge from the mud. They are a historian's dream and a water manager's nightmare. The wooden hulls, preserved for over a century in low-oxygen mud, are a stark physical measure of how far the water has fallen. Further north, near Perry County, Missouri, stands an island of limestone called Tower Rock. For most of modern history, it has been an island, accessible only by boat. But during the 2022 drought, for the first time in memory, so much water vanished from the channel that people could walk to it from the Missouri shore. It became a pilgrimage site, a symbol of the river's unprecedented retreat. These are not just curiosities, they are markers, like the pale bands of bark on cypress trees in a drying lake, showing you where the world used to be. They are a warning written in reclaimed history. Now, here is the part nobody is putting on the news. This is no longer a once-in-a-generation crisis. The crisis of 2022 was called historic. Then, less than a year later, the crisis of 2023 arrived and was even worse. A system that used to have decades to recover between major droughts is now being hit with back-to-back record-breaking low-water events. The temporary solutions are becoming permanent fixtures. The underwater sill at Belle Chasse, originally conceived as a temporary emergency measure, is now part of an annual playbook. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has developed rapid response protocols, expecting to rebuild it whenever the flow drops below the critical 300,000 CFS threshold. In January 2024, a new governor, Jeff Landry, was sworn into office in Louisiana. He inherited not a singular disaster, but a chronic condition. This is the new reality on the Mississippi, a state of perpetual emergency. The river's natural rhythm has been broken. Lake Itasca, Minnesota, the river's source, is over 2,300 miles from the Gulf of Mexico. The health of the river in Louisiana is inextricably linked to the snowpack in Wisconsin and the rainfall in the Ohio River Valley. The current drought is not a single dry spell in a single state. It is a basin-wide deficit. The National Weather Service and the USDA track this through a constellation of sensors and gauges, and the data shows a system under compounding stress. The crisis is not just one of low water, but of disconnect. The upper and lower Mississippi are functionally different rivers, but they are part of one indivisible system. When the tributaries that feed the main stem in Illinois and Missouri run low, that deficit is paid for weeks later and 1,000 miles south, where the river meets the sea. Paul Young, the mayor of Memphis, Tennessee, also serves as the co-chair of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, an organization representing the communities that line the river. His city sits at a critical junction, and the economic pain of navigation shutdowns is immediate. But the greater challenge, as the MRCTI has noted, is building a unified response across a dozen states with competing interests but a shared vulnerability. The engineering of the response is a story in itself. Building the sill is more than just dumping dirt. It is a highly choreographed operation. Dredging vessels, essentially floating industrial vacuums, scrape sediment from designated borrow pits in the riverbed areas where the material is ideal. They then motor to the sill location and carefully release the material. It takes hundreds of loads, day and night, for weeks. The final structure is immense, an underwater ridge rising from the river floor, its peak carefully calculated to sit dozens of feet below the surface, high enough to trip the salt water, but low enough not to obstruct the massive ships that still need to pass overhead. It's a structure made of the river itself, designed to police the river's own altered chemistry. But it is fundamentally temporary. Once the spring rains and northern snowmelt arrive, and the river's flow returns to a healthy 400,000 or 500,000 cubic feet per second, the sheer force of the water will wash the sill away, smoothing the riverbed back to its dredged profile. The problem is, those healthy flows are no longer guaranteed. The return to normal is no longer normal. Okay, I know this is the second time I'm mentioning this, and it can feel a bit weird, but if you've made it this far into the details of sediment sills and saltwater wedges, you're clearly one of the few who cares about the full story. Subscribing is genuinely the only metric that allows us to spend the time required to do this research. It makes a huge difference. Anyway, the ecological cost is harder to quantify than the economic one. The Mississippi River Delta is one of the most vital and fragile ecosystems in North America. The intrusion of saltwater poisons freshwater marshes, killing vegetation that holds the land together and accelerating coastal erosion. It stresses freshwater fish populations, from catfish to bass, which cannot survive in brackish water. The water intakes threatened in Plaquemines Parish in New Orleans, maintained by organizations like the Sewerage and Water Board of New Orleans, SWB&O, are not just pipes, they are links to a delicate balance. When salinity levels rise past the public health threshold of 250 parts per million, the water becomes undrinkable. It corrodes pipes and appliances. It can pose a risk to individuals with hypertension. During the 2023 crisis, plans were drafted to bring in massive desalination units, or even build new pipelines to draw fresh water from farther upstream, at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars. For a few tense weeks, the question was not whether the salt water would reach New Orleans, but when. Timely rains and the fortified sill managed to halt its advance just in time, but it came closer than ever before. The conversation has now shifted from response to preemption. Experts at the Army Corps of Engineers and state agencies like the Louisiana Department of Health are modeling future scenarios. What happens if there are 3 consecutive years of drought? 4 years? At what point does a temporary sill become an unworkable solution? Some have proposed more permanent structures, underwater gates that could be raised or lowered. But the Mississippi is a working river, a federal navigation channel. Any permanent structure would have massive implications for shipping and could alter the river's sediment flow in unpredictable ways, potentially starving the delta of the very land-building material it needs to survive. There are no easy answers. Every solution presents a new, complex problem. The river is a system of interlocking variables, and changing one creates a cascade of unintended consequences. The story is written in the numbers collected by the Bureau of Transportation Statistics and the Waterways Council. Inc. Over $12 billion in annual commodity value on the upper Mississippi alone. Billions more on the lower river. It's in the reports from the National Corn Growers Association detailing how shipping disruptions add cents to the bushel price of corn, a cost that gets passed from the farmer to the feedlot to the consumer. But it's also written in the human experience. In the quiet anxiety of a family in Plaquemines Parish, turning on their tap, wondering if it will taste of salt. In the stress of a barge pilot navigating a channel that has become a treacherous maze of shallows. In the frustration of a farmer in Minnesota, whose harvest sits in a silo waiting for a river 1,000 miles away to rise. This is what systemic failure looks like. Not a single dramatic collapse, but a slow creeping dysfunction. A system losing its resilience, its capacity to absorb shock. The droughts of 2022 and 2023 were the shocks. The river's inability to bounce back is the core of the story. The Great River is becoming less reliable, less predictable. And a nation's economy was built on the promise of its predictability. The new political leadership, from Governor Landry in Louisiana to the mayors in towns up and down the river, is confronting a problem that is not political in origin, but requires immense political will to address. It demands a level of interstate cooperation and federal investment not seen in generations. So, the underwater sill near Belchasse holds for now. The ghost ships near Baton Rouge remain silent witnesses in the mud. The water gauges in Memphis flicker between negative and positive numbers, each tick a measure of economic hope or despair. But the fundamental imbalance remains. The Gulf of Mexico continues its relentless, patient push. The river, weakened by a drought stretching across half a country, is fighting a defensive battle on its own territory. And there is a final, existential question buried in the hydrological data. If a river that has defined the map and the economy of a nation for 2 centuries can have its fundamental nature altered in just a few years, what does that say about the stability of the other natural systems we depend on? 3 questions hang over the Mississippi Delta tonight. How long can a temporary wall of mud hold back the pressure of an entire ocean? Why is a pattern of severe drought, once a generational event, now an annual threat? And what does it mean for a country when its most important natural highway begins to flow the wrong way? The water passing Vicksburg, Mississippi, today will take weeks to reach the Gulf, but as it travels, it is being met by that invisible wedge of salt water, a silent invader moving north. The battle line is drawn somewhere in the deep, dark water of the Channel, an unseen front in a war we are just beginning to understand. The engineers are still monitoring. The farmers are still watching the sky. And somewhere below New Orleans, in the cold, dark depths of the river, the ocean is waiting.